more time, can we thank our musicians, the strings, and Dave? I know enough about these folks to know that they all have busy schedules, and they're trying to squeeze in rehearsals here, there, and everywhere to bring us what I think is just some marvelous moments in this service. And so I'm grateful for you guys. I am grateful for you guys. It is a blessing to have you here, and thank you so, so much. All right, I'll let you go now. Just wanted you to stay up there they've been doing this all morning long. Hey, before we launch into today's message, just want to give you a quick bit of housekeeping. Next Sunday at Concordia, kind of a special Sunday, we call it Loyalty Sunday, and this is something that goes way back to the earliest days of this church when we were founded in the 50s. If you're like a member of Concordia, you're part of a family of faith at this church, you should have received a letter from our senior pastor, Pastor Tucker, talking about what Loyalty Sunday is, what it's all about, along with a pledge card. And here's my request of you. Here's the ask. Over this next week, prayerfully consider how you and your family might be able to support this ministry over 2022. Because you are the reason we're able to do what we do. And one of the things we're very committed to, because we really appreciate your generosity for this ministry, we're very committed to just being good stewards of what you give, and that's why we ask for pledges, so that we're not just pulling numbers for our budget out of the air. It's actually based on something that you have given us. And by the way, if you've never been a part of Loyalty Sunday, come on back next weekend. It's a moving experience. It's a cool experience. You're going to have a great time, and we believe that the giving that happens at this place is just one of the ways that God will actually work through me and work through you. And so, with that being said, that's actually a segue into our series, because the title of our series is actually Through You. And I'll just kind of give you the big bottom line of this series right up front, right out of the gate, okay? We believe that God has given all sorts of stuff to you. He's given you your house and your home and your family and your job and your influence and your power and your prestige and your money and your resources. He's given all sorts of stuff to you, but the reason he's given all of that to you is because he wants you to be a blessing to the world, because that is how he is going to work through you. God has a mission for your life. God has placed a calling on your life, and the calling is this. He wants you to be his conduit of his blessing to his world. And so here's what we're doing in this series. We're just taking a look at some stories, and they're all from the Old Testament, about how God has worked through people way back when. And then we're asking this question: if that is how God worked through them way back when, how might God be able to work through us here and now? And today, as we continue our series, we actually come to one of my favorite characters, not only in the Old Testament, but actually in the whole Bible. Today, we're going to walk through the story of Joseph. Now, we actually get Joseph's story near the end of the first book of the Bible, the book of Genesis, and it's kind of a long story, so kind of hang with me here. That means it'll probably be a long sermon. Just hang with me here, okay? We'll try to get through this story, but let me just begin by giving you a little bit of background, okay? Joseph is actually one son of 12 sons that a guy named Jacob has. And Jacob has these 12 sons by 4 different women. Jacob was married to 2 women at the same time. And then he also has some of these sons through some servants who live in the household. Now, just so we're very clear here, okay? We do not recommend that type of family arrangement at Concordia Lutheran Church. I just want to make sure nobody gets the wrong idea here, because it causes problems. And sure enough, it caused Jacob lots of problems. But as Jacob and his sons are growing up, they live in a land called Canaan, and Canaan is modern-day Israel. And we first meet Joseph when he's a young man, a teenager, in Genesis 37, verse 2. Joseph was a young man, and here's when we first meet him, when he was 17 years old. Now, verse 3, Jacob, the daddy, loved Joseph more than any of his other sons, more than any of his other 11 sons, because he had been born to him in his old age. It turns out that Joseph was, in our day and age, what we might refer to as a surprise baby, right? Jacob was getting a little bit long in the tooth. He wasn't planning on having any more kids, but then Joseph comes, and immediately Jacob kind of falls for Joseph. Joseph becomes Jacob's favorite son. But here's the key. Jacob not only feels favoritism for Joseph, He actually flaunts his favoritism for Joseph. And he flaunts it by lavishing on Joseph all of these incredible gifts. In verse 3, it says that Jacob makes for Joseph a richly ornamented robe. Now, if you grew up in church, you may have learned this as Joseph's coat of what? Many colors. Now, no matter what you call it or how you describe it, the effect is basically the same, okay? This coat was an incredible coat. It was expensive and it was noticeable, okay? All of Joseph's buddies noticed his coat, and all of Joseph's brothers noticed his coat. Now, for Joseph's buddies, that just made him the cool kid, right? Because he was the kid that daddy gave all the really good stuff to. He got the richly ornamented robe. He got the Nike Air 11s, right? He was able to wear the Rolex watch, and his dad gave him a Corvette or something like that. He was the kid that every other kid wanted to be in his high school. But for Joseph's brothers, all of the stuff that Joseph got had a different effect on them. Okay, it didn't make Joseph cool to them. It made Joseph annoying to them. And this annoyance eventually turns into animosity. And this animosity eventually morphs into anger. And this anger eventually morphs into a sinister plan of action. Because these brothers get so sick of their brother Joseph that they decide that they're going to hatch a plot to try to take him out. And one day, they actually try to. It's a little bit later in Genesis 37. These brothers are tending some sheep because that's what they did. They all lived on the farm. And all the brothers are there except for Joseph, because Joseph doesn't need to be there because Joseph is daddy's favorite son. He can get there whenever he wants. And so Joseph finally shows up to help his brothers, around the crack of noon or whenever it is, right? And in Genesis 37, verse 23, it says, when Joseph came to his brothers, they saw their opportunity to be done with him, to get rid of him. And so here's what they do. They strip him of his robe, that richly ornamented robe that he was wearing, and they took him and they threw him into a cistern in the middle of this sheep pasture where they're just going to leave him for dead. They're not going to pull him out. And here's the thing. He would have actually died right there in that cistern if it were not for what happens next in verse 25. All of a sudden, the brothers look up, and they see a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Now, let me say a word to you about the Ishmaelites. The Ishmaelites were basically the ancient version of traveling pawn kings, okay? They were the guys you went to if you wanted to, sell something and make some money, or if you wanted to buy something, if you wanted to swap something. That's what the Ishmaelites did. And so when all of these brothers see this traveling band of Ishmaelites, one brother gets a bright idea. Verse 26, Judah. By the way, remember Judah, because he'll become important a little bit later, okay? So Judah looks at his brothers and he says, hey, we're not going to make any money or we're not going to gain anything if we kill our brother and cover up his blood. I have an idea. Let's pawn our brother to the Ishmaelites. Let's sell him and not lay our hands on him. All the brothers think it's a good idea. They all pull Joseph up out of the cistern and they sell him for 20 shekels of silver to the Israelites. Now, you need to know this. The going rate for the selling of a slave in this day was 30 shekels of silver. So, Joseph's brothers sell him to the Ishmaelites for 30% off, all right? Because that's how much they hate him. That's how angry they are at him at this point in his life. And so the Ishmaelites, they're happy, they're getting a great deal, and they take Joseph, and here's what they do. They take him down to Egypt, and their plan is they bought him for a cut rate price, and now they're going to sell him once they get down to Egypt. And they do. A couple of chapters later in Genesis 39, they sell him to an Egyptian governmental official named Potiphar. Now, Potiphar is kind of a high-flying, highfalutin, high-rolling, high-powered guy. He's the guy who was actually in charge of the army of ancient Egypt. In our day and age, he would be kind of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He would be part of the Pharaoh of Egypt's inner circle. And so Potiphar is the guy who buys Joseph. And what Potiphar does for Joseph is incredible. He basically makes him the head of his household because he's always at work. He has a lot of stuff to do. And so he says to Joseph, I'm just going to let my household be taken care of by you. Genesis 39, verse 4, Potiphar put Joseph in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. With Joseph in charge, He did not have to concern himself with anything because Joseph was taking care of everything. And so you've heard of a rags to riches story before? Well, Joseph's story is a little different than that, okay? He starts off rich. He has the coat of many colors. He has the richly ornamented robe. He has all the stuff from his daddy because he's his daddy's favorite. But then his brothers get the best of him, sell him to the Ishmaelites, and he goes from riches to rags. But then the Ishmaelites sell him to a highfalutin Egyptian official named Potiphar, and he gets to be the head of Potiphar's household. And so now he's back to being rich. Joseph is living what I like to call kind of a yo-yo life, right? He's up, and then he's down. And now he's back up again, but you know the old saying, what goes up must come what? Down. And Joseph is fixing to fall down in a big way. Genesis 39, verse 6, now Joseph was well built and handsome. So by this time in Joseph's story, he's probably in his mid-20s, okay? And it turns out that Joseph is a pretty good-looking mid-20-something dude, okay? He has the coiffed back hair. He has the big arms because he works out. He has the six-pack abs that make every other guy jealous because most guys are not carrying around six-pack abs. They're carrying around whole coolers, right? And so he makes all the other guys jealous. Now here's the thing about being a real good-looking mid-20-something-year-old guy, okay? The good thing about being a good-looking mid-20-something-year-old guy is that everybody notices you. But you know what the bad thing is about being a mid-20-something-year-old good-looking guy? The bad thing is that everybody notices you. And one day, somebody notices Joseph. Genesis 39, verse 7, his master's wife, Mrs. Potiphar, notices Joseph. And Mrs. Potiphar says to Joseph, "Come to bed with me." Now, the Old Testament originally written in Hebrew, and a more wooden translation of this little phrase, "come to bed with me," would be something like, "lie down now." That's what Mrs. Potiphar says to Joseph. In other words, she's not leaving a lot to the imagination, okay? There's nothing suggestive here. There's nothing subtle here. This is a command and demand, and all of a sudden, Joseph goes from being on a massive high to falling way down low. Because Joseph is plunged into a dangerous and damaging and devastating and even potentially deadly situation. Because if Joseph gives in to Mrs. Potiphar's overtures, okay, and he comes to bed now, if Mr. Potiphar finds out, he's not going to be happy. In fact, in this day and age, if you sleep with somebody else's wife, the penalty for that is death. And so Joseph really could be killed for that. But then again, if he refuses Mrs. Potiphar, she can't fire him because she's not in charge of him, but she can make his life pretty miserable. And that's exactly what Mrs. Potiphar does. Genesis 39, verse 11, one day Joseph went into the house to attend to his duties, and none of the other household servants were inside. And so once again, Mrs. Potiphar catches Joseph by his what? By his cloak. Joseph's clothes always seem to get him into trouble, don't they? She catches him by his cloak. And she says to him, "Come to bed with me. Lie down now," she says again. But he left his cloak in her hand and ran out of the house. When she saw that he had left his cloak in her hand and had run out of the house, she called her household servants. "Look," she said to them, "this Hebrew has been brought to us to make sport of us. He came in here to sleep with me, but I screamed. When he heard me scream for help, he left his cloak beside me, and he ran out of the house." Mrs. Potiphar accuses Joseph of trying to do the thing to her that she actually tried to do to him. Mrs. Potiphar accuses Joseph of trying to seduce her when it was her who really tried to seduce him. And you know how this goes, right? She tells her story to the household servants, and eventually the story gets out, and the story gets around, and the story gets back to Mr. Potiphar. And when Mr. Potiphar finds out, he is furious. And he actually could have, if he wanted to, he could have demanded that Joseph be put to death. But in just like the smallest moment of mercy, Mr. Potiphar decides that instead of just putting Joseph to death, he's going to throw him into an Egyptian dungeon. Genesis 39 verse 20. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison. And so here's Joseph's story so far. He's gone from being rich as a 17-year-old boy to being in rags when he was sold to the Ishmaelites. He's gone from being rich when he was the head of Potiphar's household to now being in rags. He's in an Egyptian dungeon. His life has gone up and down and up and down, and this is where Joseph's story intersects with our lives. Because maybe you can relate to Joseph. Maybe your life feels like it's riches to rags and riches to rags, up and down and up and down, and you just can't catch a break. You got a job, it's a great job. You've been working there for years, but then the COVID thing happens, right? And your company downsizes and you lose your job. But you're not going to roll over and die. No, you're not. You go and you beat the bushes and you pound the pavement and you send out literally hundreds of resumes. And you go on dozens of job interviews until you find a brand new job. And you're so excited. But then about 3 months into your new job, the new company downsizes and you're the new kid on the block, so you lose your job again. It's riches to rags, up and down, just like Joseph. Or you've been healthy your whole life. But then one day there appears a lump where there was not a lump before. You go into the doctor to get it checked out. The doctor biopsies it, and the news is not good. It's cancer. And it's an aggressive form of cancer. But you decide you're not going to take this lying down. No, you're going to fight it. And so you go through a regimen of chemotherapy and radiation, and you beat it back. After like a year, you're cancer-free, and the doctor says, okay, just come back once a year for your annual checkup. So you do. Year 1, you're doing fine. Year 2, you come back, you're cancer-free. Year 3, same thing. You come back, you're cancer-free. Year 4, you come back for your annual checkup, and all of a sudden, cancer's back. You've gone from feeling rich to feeling ragged. Your life keeps going up and down and up and down, just like Joseph. You know, there's this really interesting line when Joseph is in this dungeon. Genesis 39, verse 20, it says, while Joseph was there in prison, look at this. The Lord was with him. Now, I'll be honest with you. If I was in an Egyptian dungeon, I would not be saying, oh, the Lord is with me. I'd be asking, where in the world is he? Because I live with this kind of spiritual assumption, and maybe I'm not the only one, okay? Maybe you live with the spiritual assumption too. It sounds something like this. If the Lord is with me, that obviously means that he is going to do a bunch of stuff for me. Right? If the Lord is with me, I'm not going to lose my job. I'm going to get a promotion in my job. That's what the Lord is going to do for me. If the Lord is with me, I'm not going to get sick. I'm going to remain well. That's what the Lord is going to do for me. If the Lord is with me, he's obviously going to do a bunch of great stuff for me. What the story of Joseph does is it takes that spiritual assumption and it exposes it as a spiritual myth. Just because the Lord is with you does not always mean that he's going to do a bunch of stuff for you. But here's what we're going to learn from Joseph's story. Even if he doesn't do a bunch of great stuff for you, he might just do an amazing work through you. Because that's exactly what God does through Joseph. Joseph, he's languishing away in this Egyptian dungeon, and he meets a couple of guys. One who is a cupbearer, and another who is a baker. Now, these two guys actually used to be government employees. They used to serve the Pharaoh of Egypt in his court. A cupbearer was somebody who would bring the Pharaoh his cups of wine, but he would taste them before the Pharaoh got to them. That way, in case they were poisoned, the cupbearer could take the hit for the Pharaoh. And then the baker was the guy who would bake all the stuff for Pharaoh, right? The bread and the brownies and the donuts and the cookies and the baklava, whatever it was that Pharaoh wanted, this guy would bake for Pharaoh. And it turns out we don't know all the details here, but the cupbearer and the baker and the candlestick maker, maybe he was in there too. They have this little falling out with Pharaoh, and they get cast out of his court and thrown into this dungeon. And one night, these two guys, the cupbearer and the baker, they have these dreams that are kind of odd and ominous. They think they may be omens of something that is to come, but they don't quite know what these dreams would mean. And so they're all there in the dungeon together, and the cupbearer and the baker start talking to Joseph about their dreams, and they say, we've had these dreams. The cupbearer says, I had this dream where I actually got my job back. I was back in Pharaoh's court. I was serving him cups of wine, and Pharaoh did the strangest thing. He kind of looked at me and put his fingers right under my chin like this and lifted my head up so that I could look at him, and then I handed him a cup of wine. I have no idea what that's all about. And Joseph says, well, I know what that's all about. In 3 days, actually, cupbearer, you're going to get your job back. You're going to be restored to Pharaoh's court, and you're going to start serving him wine again. And the cupbearer goes, really? And Joseph goes, really? But do me a favor, Joseph continues. This is Genesis 40, verse 14. When this happens and when all goes well with you, remember me and show me kindness. Mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison. Deal? Joseph says. And the cupbearer says, oh yeah, deal. Now, the baker's listening to all this, and the baker chimes in, and he says, okay, do my dream too, because I had a dream where I was back in Pharaoh's court too, and Pharaoh kind of lifted up my head like this too, and I had this basket of bread on my head, and there were birds that were just kind of lazily eating out of the basket. And Joseph says to the baker, well, here's what your dream means. You're going to get out of this dungeon in 3 days too, and you're going to go back to Pharaoh's court, and he's going to do exactly what you saw him do in your dream. He's going to take your head and kind of lift it up. But then after he does that, he's also going to lift your head off. Don't know how to tell you this, but in 3 days you're going to be beheaded, and then you're going to be impaled on a pole. Now, just so you know, you don't have to put in a good word for me with Pharaoh like I told the cupbearer to do. You don't got to worry about that. No. Now, sure enough, all of this comes to pass exactly the way that Joseph said it was going to come to pass. In 3 days, the cupbearer and the baker are freed, and one gets his job back, and the other, okay. But you know how the saying goes, right? Out of sight, out of mind. The cupbearer, as soon as he's out of the slammer, totally forgets about Joseph. That is until about 2 years later, when the Pharaoh himself begins to have some dreams. And the dreams seem kind of odd and ominous. They almost seem like an omen of things to come, but Pharaoh doesn't know what they mean. And so here's what he does. He calls in all his government employees, all of his court, including the cupbearer, and he says to them, so I've had these dreams, and I need someone to tell me what they mean. And all of a sudden, the cupbearer's memory is jogged, and he says to Pharaoh, so remember that time when we had that little thing, when I was in the dungeon for, a decade or so? It wasn't a big deal, right? But now I'm out. Well, I met this guy on the inside. His name is Joseph, and he's really good at interpreting dreams. And so Pharaoh comes and gets him, and he drags him in. And he says to Joseph, so I'm having these dreams. And in one dream, I see these 7 cows, and they're like plump cows. Just dreaming about them makes me want a ribeye, okay? They're amazing. But then as soon as I see these 7 really plump cows, I see these 7 really skinny and gaunt cows, and they look like they're near death, like they're just going to keel over. And the strangest thing happens in this dream, okay? The 7 skinny and gaunt cows, they all of a sudden begin to eat the 7 plump cows, but the 7 skinny and gaunt cows don't become any plumper. They're just as skinny. And then I have this other dream where I see this beautiful field of grain. It's golden and gorgeous, and I see 7 heads of grain, and they're full. I just want to pick them and make bread out of them, but then all of a sudden, everything kind of changes, and I see a desert. And in the desert, I see 7 scorched heads of grain. They're kind of leaning over, looking like they're going to keel over too. And the strangest thing happens in my dream. The 7 scorched heads of grain eat the 7 big heads of grain, but they don't become any bigger. Joseph, can you tell me what these dreams mean? And Joseph says, well, actually, I can. The 7 really plump cows and the 7 really good-looking heads of grain, those are actually going to be 7 years of prosperity for you, Pharaoh, and for your nation. In fact, these are going to be the best 7 years the nation of Egypt has ever had in its history. Your economy is going to be all up and to the right. Your stock market is going to boom. Your housing market is going to boom. You're going to have so much cattle, you're going to be able to have ribeye every night. And by the way, you're going to make so much grain during this time. You're going to grow so much grain, you're not going to have room enough to store it all. It's going to be incredible. But then after 7 years, it's going to be like somebody almost just flips a switch. And everything's going to change. The bottom's going to fall out of the economy. The stock market's going to crash. The housing market, the bubble's going to burst. And this drought's going to happen. This famine's going to come over the land. All of your cattle is going to die. And all of your grain is going to be scorched. It's going to die too. And if you're not careful, Pharaoh, if you don't plan for this, you know what else is going to die? All your people. They're going to starve in this famine. And so, Pharaoh, here's what you may want to do. You may want to appoint somebody, okay, to basically be your chief tax official. And over the first 7 years, when everything is going great, tax that grain, all that grain that everybody's growing at the rate of, let's say, 20%, okay? And take the grain and put it in a storehouse. Save it up across the nation of Egypt and all these different storehouses. And then, when the famine hits after 7 years, here's what you'll be able to do. You'll be able to take the grain that you taxed from people and sell it back to people, so you'll make money on it twice, O Pharaoh. And every government official loves that plan, making money twice, right? And so Pharaoh says, that's a great idea. And you're just the guy, Joseph, to be put in charge of that idea. And so Joseph gets to work, and he starts taxing all the grain at 20%. 7 years come and 7 years go, and everything's going great. But just like Joseph said, it's like somebody, flips a switch. And the bottom falls out of the economy. This drought sweeps over the land. All the cattle die. All the grain is scorched. And Joseph opens up all the storehouses from the 7 good years to sell grain to people during the 7 bad years. Now, this famine is so bad that it affects not only the nation of Egypt, but actually all the areas surrounding the nation of Egypt, including an area about 200 miles north of Egypt called Canaan, where a man named Jacob lives with his now 11 sons. And Jacob hears about this bigwig government official in the nation of Egypt and how he had this master plan to store up all this grain, and it's working. It's keeping people from starving to death. And he says to his 11 sons, okay, why don't you go on down to Egypt and go buy some grain so that we don't die? And so his brothers do. They go and they find this Egyptian official who's selling all this grain. And you know who this Egyptian official is, right? It's their brother. Now, Joseph recognizes them as his brothers, but they don't recognize him as his brother. And so they go round and round and back and forth, and they haggle and they bargain and they do all this stuff until finally Joseph can't take it anymore. And so he finally says, hey guys, I'm your brother. I'm the guy you sold to the Ishmaelites all those years ago. And I love their reaction. Genesis 45 verse 3, they were terrified. Of course they were. I'd be terrified too. In fact, a couple of chapters later, here's what they say, Genesis 50 verse 15. What if Joseph holds a grudge against us and pays us back for all the wrongs that we've done to him? In other words, they're saying, well, what if Joseph leaves us for dead in the middle of a famine, just like we left him for dead in a cistern, in a field? Now, when Joseph hears what his brothers are whispering, his response is one of my favorite verses in the whole Bible. Here's how Joseph responds. Genesis 50, verse 20, even though you intended to harm me, God intended all this only for good. And, what are those next two words? Through me, He preserved the lives of countless people. Now, most scholars think that when Joseph says these words, he's about 41 years old. When Joseph is sold to the Ishmaelites way back in Genesis 37, anybody remember how old he was? 17. It's been 24 years. It's taken a while. And Joseph has been through all sorts of ups and downs, highs and lows, riches and rags, but through it all, he never ceased to believe something. Here's what he never ceased to believe. Even though he didn't always understand everything, and even when God's plan was really hard for him to see, he kept on saying, I believe that God can work through a person like me. Maybe even to save a nation from starvation. That's how God worked through Joseph. Now, here's the question of our series. If that's how God worked through Joseph, how might God work through you? Now, before you answer that question, I got to tell you one more part and piece of Joseph's story. And this is my favorite part and piece of Joseph's story. This is the best part and piece of Joseph's story. And part of the reason I love this part and piece of Joseph's story is that Joseph, while he was on earth, he didn't even know about this part and piece of his story, but it's the best part. The best part of his story, because the way that God works through Joseph next is incredible. Okay, pop quiz, back to the beginning of the message, okay? Which of the brothers decided it was a good idea to pawn his brothers to the Ishmaelites? Anybody remember his name? His name was Judah. Yeah, Genesis 37, verse 26. Judah is the one who says to his brothers, okay, come, let's sell Joseph to the Ishmaelites, and let's not lay our hands on him. Now, we read about Judah, again, about 1,900 years later, at the beginning of the Gospel of Matthew. Matthew 1, verse 2, talks about Jacob, talks about this family. But this time, instead of kind of focusing in and singling in on Joseph, Matthew decides, I'm going to focus in and single in on Judah. So Jacob was the father of Judah and all his brothers. Now, after Matthew focuses in on Judah, what he does is he leads us through this big list of names, this genealogy. And I'm going to read to you this list of names, this genealogy, because that's exactly what you came to church to hear, a big, long genealogy, but just bear with me here for a second, because the payoff's pretty good. You guys ready? Matthew 1, verse 2, here we go. Jacob was the father of Judah and his brothers. Now, Judah was the father of Perez and Zerah. Perez was the father of Hezron. Hezron was the father of Ram. Ram was the father of Amminadab. Amminadab was the father of Nahshon. Nahshon was the father of Salmon. Salmon was the father of Boaz. Boaz was the father of Obed. Obed was the father of Jesse. And Jesse was the father of King David, real famous king in the Old Testament. David was the father of Solomon. Solomon was the father of Rehoboam. Rehoboam was the father of Abijah. Abijah was the father of Asa. Asa was the father of Jehoshaphat. Jehoshaphat was the father of Jehoram. Jehoram was the father of Uzziah. Uzziah was the father of Jotham. Jotham was the father of Ahaz. Ahaz was the father of Hezekiah, and Hezekiah was the father of Manasseh. By the way, the people up in the control booth right now, they hate me Got all these slides, and they're just going spacebar, 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 just trying to keep up, okay? Okay, back to Manasseh. Manasseh was the father of Ammon. Ammon was the father of Josiah. Josiah was the father of Jeconiah and his brothers. Jeconiah was the father of Shealtiel. Shealtiel was the father of Zerubbabel. Zerubbabel was the father of Abihud. Abihud was the father of Eliakim. Eliakim was the father of Azor. Azor was the father of Zadok. Zadok was the father of Akim. Akim was the father of Elihud. Elihud was the father of Eleazar. Eleazar was the father of Mathan. Mathan was the father of Jacob. And Jacob was the father of who? Joseph. Oh, I think I've heard of him before, right? Joseph was the husband of who? Mary. And Mary was the mother of who? Jesus, the, Matthew says, Messiah. It turns out that through the line of a man who once sold his brother into slavery for 20 shekels of silver comes another man who had a disciple who sold him to a cross for 30 pieces of silver. It turns out that from the line of a man who was once saved by his brother from death in a famine comes another man whose whole mission it is to save the world in its sin and brokenness. Let's do a little thought experiment. Hang with me here for a second. What would have happened if Joseph would have just given up? What would have happened if he would have given up when he was sold to the Ishmaelites and said, I'm not going down to Egypt. I'm going to die before I get there? What would have happened if Joseph would have given up when Mrs. Potiphar tried to get to him, and he would have just given in and said, yeah, it's not worth it. I'm 20-something. Might as well live. What would have happened if Joseph would have given up when he was thrown into an Egyptian dungeon and not talked to anybody, not made friends with anybody? A baker? A cupbearer? Who cares? What would have happened if Joseph would have given up on his family, on his brothers? And when they came to him and they were looking for grain so they wouldn't starve to death, he just would have said, you know what? Turn around is fair play. You left me for dead. I'm going to leave you for dead. What would have happened if Joseph would have given up on God and said, I don't get this. His plan is something I can't see, so there's no way that he could work through a guy like me. What would have happened to this genealogy? What would have happened to history? What would have happened in eternity? Now here's the thing. I believe God is sovereign. He would have worked it out. Yeah, he would have. But, isn't it incredible how God chose to work through Joseph? Because Joseph never ceased to believe that even if he didn't understand it all, and even if there was a plan from God that he could not see, he just kept on saying, God can work through a guy like me. Even though you intended to harm me, he says to his brothers, God intended it only for good. And through me, He preserved the lives of countless people. Now, it's your turn. How is God going to work through you? How are you going to make Joseph's statement your statement? Let's throw it up on the screen. Even though you intended to harm me, and maybe you got lots of people that don't like you and they want to hurt you, okay? God is still intending it only for good. He's going to work it together for good. And through me, you can say, He is going to do what? He's going to use me to help underprivileged kids and mentor them so they can experience a taste of a life they'd never otherwise see. He's going to use me to be a person in my workplace where like morale is tanked because of COVID, and to bring encouragement to the people that I see every day. He's going to use me because I got some pretty good financial resources and I can give to charities and churches in maybe ways that other people can't. He's going to use me to bless my family. I'm going to do things a little differently with my kids than my parents did things with their kids. I'm going to break some legacies of hurt and pain and shame. Here's the question I want you to rattle around all week long. And don't forget it, because it matters. How is God going to work through me? Because here's the thing. There are a lot of things I don't know. But this much I do know. Even if life doesn't always make sense, and even if there's a divine plan that sometimes we feel like we can't see, God can do great work through people like you and like me. Let's stand and pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for Joseph. Thank you for what you did through him. Now, let's take this story and just ask the question, what you going to do through us? Father, may we be open to your Spirit's promptings so that we can be people who serve you in your world by loving people you love. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Remember, even if everything doesn't always go well for you, God's still with you, just like he was with Joseph. And because of that, you're blessed. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine on you and be gracious unto you. The Lord lift up his countenance on you and give you his peace. And now, what's God going to do through you? He's going to make you shine like a star in the universe as you hold out God's precious word of life. Amen.